Okay, let's get going. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this Climate Action Programme lunchtime event. My name's Kaylee and I'm the Partnerships Communications and Engagement Coordinator. I'm really pleased to welcome you to this event on minimising your organisation's digital footprint. It is such an interesting and important topic.
Yeah.
Oh, a bit of interference there. Classic Zoom. This is the third in our series of breakfast and for today lunchtime events as part of the Climate Action Programme. And we've switched to lunchtime just for today to accommodate the different time zones of our speakers. And these events are meant as informal introductory sessions, and I'm sure you'll learn a lot from our speakers and from each other. But this is such a rich topic that I expect we will return to it at a later date to go a bit more in depth. But before we get stuck in, let's just take a couple of moments to arrive. You'll get the most out of the event today if you're able to be present with us throughout. So I encourage you to let go of whatever you were doing just before you joined the call, to close down all your windows, your emails and tabs, and if it's available to you, I'm going to invite you to stand up and have a little shake or a stretch, or simply take a few deep breaths and be ready to listen and engage. It's going to be me being the one flailing around on the recording, so no need to worry about what you look like, but I would welcome you joining in. So let's go for it. Shake off all that work you were doing before, have a little stretch and a few deep breaths. And thank you for joining in with that. If indeed you did, it's hard to know if it's just me. But hopefully you're feeling focused and energized and ready to get stuck in. But I've got a few housekeeping notes to mention before we get started. So unless you're speaking, we invite you to turn your cameras off for now to minimise the carbon footprint of the event, and switch them back on for the networking at the end. As you will have received a notification, we are recording this call, but the networking breakout groups won't be recorded. And all attendees should be muted for now, but please feel free to use the chat throughout the event to connect with each other, to share your experiences and learnings. And if you would like to share about this event on social media, you can use the hashtag Climate Action Bristol. And I know the timing is slightly awkward, seeing as we're not actually providing you with any lunch. So I hope you will manage to grab some food. And the first part of the session will be a talk, so you can always eat whilst you listen before the more interactive networking session. All right, a bit of background to start with then. So for those of you that don't know, Bristol Green Capital Partnership is a unique network made up of over 1,000 member organisations from across all sectors, working towards a fast and fair response to the climate and nature crises. We think we're the largest partnership of our kind in the world, and it is our mission to work together to explore the environmental challenges our city faces and develop collaborative solutions that involve everybody. This event today is part of the Climate Action Programme, which supports organisations of all sizes and sectors to reduce their carbon emissions through events, resources and peer-to-peer learning opportunities. And the programme is free for organisations thanks to the support of NatWest and Bristol City Council. Through this programme, we hope you will feel inspired and supported to take action wherever you're starting from, and feel part of a community of people and organisations who are committed to positive change. We have loads of resources to help you on your carbon reduction journey, which you can find on our website. And my colleague Claire is going to share some links in the chat, along with a couple of recent highlights, such as our guide to creating an engaging climate action plan, tips on embedding sustainable procurement practices, and insights from our event on engaging employees in climate and nature action. We'll also pull out some top tips and links to share with you after the session today. It is important to acknowledge that we as a partnership are on our own journey with this as well, and digital is an area where we've got a lot to do to minimise our own footprint. So we'll be learning along with you today. And who better to learn from than writer Gerry McGovern? We're really lucky to have Gerry giving a presentation today on the carbon impact of digital activities at work and practical steps you can take to minimise this. And Gerry will then be joined by Hannah Smith from Green Tech Southwest for a Q&A session. We've got a handful of very brief case studies, and finally there'll be an opportunity for networking to make connections, share any reflections from the event and build that sense of community. All right, on to the main topic. I'm absolutely thrilled to introduce Gerry McGovern. Gerry has published 8 books. His latest, Worldwide Waste, examines the impact digital is having on the environment. He developed Top Tasks, a research method which helps identify what truly matters to people. The Irish Times has described Gerry as one of 5 visionaries who have had a major impact on the development of the web. Over to you, Gerry.
Thank you very much, Kaylee. Welcome, everyone. So today, what I'd like to talk about is a couple of concepts around how to get the best out of digital from a sustainable environmental point of view. And there are 2 areas that I've been working on over the last number of years around the book Worldwide Waste and in other initiatives. And one is about really understanding worth and value in the digital world. So it seems like we are trapped in an environment of short-term thinking and selling superficial wants. And how do we get to a better environment where we have much more long-term thinking, we have a much better understanding of worth in a much broader sense, and we are solving deep needs. And the other area is waste. We create massive quantities of waste today in all areas, but particularly in digital. And how do we eliminate that as much as possible? Every year, we create a great wall of China of e-waste, of electronic waste. And in another 15, 20 years, we'll be able to build 2 great walls of China from the amount of electronic waste we create in the world. So in 2021, about 57 million tons of e-waste. It's doubling every 15 years. Less than 20% of it is being recycled, and much of the so-called recycling is happening in informal settings. We often export our e-waste to countries like Ghana or Pakistan or India, where something like 18 million children and 13 million women are involved in basically burning waste, burning cables to get to the materials, to get to the coppers, etc., in the actual materials, poisoning themselves, poisoning the land, poisoning the water table. So the story of electronic waste is a very, very negative story when you actually dig into it, because we've not paid any attention to it. In a typical device's life, certainly in a consumer and in most business settings, about 80% of the pollution is embedded. So it occurs during the manufacturing process. So a typical smartphone will be responsible for about 60 kg of CO2 to actually manufacture. And on a yearly basis, it's accountable for maybe somewhere between 3 to 5 in, the electricity for charging the battery, the CO2 that's connected there. So over a typical life of a smartphone, about 80% of the waste occurs during the manufacturing and the distribution process. So the essential lesson, if you want to take one thing out of today, it's the pollution is in the device, and where the pollution is in the device, it's extremely important to care for the device and to spread that pollution impact out over as long a period as possible. So for a laptop, it's about 300 kg of CO2 caused during the manufacturing process. There's also an estimated 1,200 kg of rock and stone and gravel and tailings produced getting the materials to make a typical laptop. And our extraction industries are having an incredible, mining industries are having an incredible impact on the world. We are now pulling out of the earth 2/3 of a Mount Everest every year. And an electronic vehicle, for example, is 4 times more extractive in relation to key raw materials than is a traditional vehicle. Okay, it's more environmental over its longer life, but its initial impact on the planet is huge and massive. So the way, in many ways, to deal with the climate crisis is with less technology, getting out cycling, getting out walking, using technology less, but in appropriate settings. So I'm going to give you basically a bunch of, hints in relation to what to do in relation to your devices, because if you want to really understand the impact of digital, it's in the actual device. So hold on to your devices, fix them, repair them, buy refurbished and remanufactured. Often refurbished and remanufactured are more reliable than products that you buy new. Now, there's a whole explanation for that. I don't have time to go into it today. But by design to last and repairable, there are a number of computer manufacturers now who are bringing out modular computers, computers that are designed to be fixed. Most computers are not designed to be fixed. They're planned obsolescence. Get the lowest spec. The higher spec, the higher the energy and the more pollution. So what's the lowest spec you need to do the actual job? Make sure you've good energy rating. Don't use large screens. Screens can consume as much energy as the entire computer. Reduce monitor brightness if you can. No screensavers. Screensavers are energy consumptive. Get disciplines. Monitor off after 5 minutes. Sleep after 10 minutes. Shut down when not using. If you're not using it for an hour, shut it off. It's good for the computer. It's good for the life of the computer. Shut down at night. Switch off everything at night. If you don't need your network at night, switch it off. Switch off every piece of electronics you can switch off, when you can switch them off. But the key lesson is hold on to these devices, get them repaired, keep them, we should aim to keep laptops to be sustainable 20 years and phones 10 years to be in any way genuinely sustainable. So there are laptops out there. The Framework laptop is now shipping. It's a modular computer. Dell has just announced the Concept Luna, which has half the CO2 impact as traditional laptops, and it's modular. So again, with your smartphone, fix it, repair it, keep it, buy refurbished, remanufactured, by design to last, repairable, minimize notifications. Anything that reduces data calling is a good idea. Anything that reduces data. So really become obsessive about collecting the minimum amount of data, using the minimum amount of data. All data is energy. Disable location services, remove unused apps. Think hard before downloading apps, because not just a download. Once you download them, they're constantly calling energy because they're calling back to their own servers and places. Watch out for greedy apps. There are particular apps like Facebook and WhatsApp, etc., that are much more energy intense than others. Keep your battery level between 50 and 80%. That's the sweet spot for long-term battery performance. Short-term charges tend to be better. Don't leave it plugged in at full charge, because it goes down a little and then it hits the charge again. So that's not good for the battery in the long term. Don't drain your battery completely. Use a wire to charge. Wireless chargers are 50% more energy intensive than wired chargers. Remove when charged, plug out the charger. The charger, it's only taking a fraction of energy, but it is taking some energy when it's plugged in. Dim the screen, use dark mode if you can, stream in standard definition. don't buy these 8K screens. They're extraordinarily energy intense, and you're not getting anything better, and you're doing a lot of damage to the environment. The eye can't see the difference on these small screens. And don't expose your phone to a lot of heat. And again, hold on to, it's a core lesson, hold on to get them fixed, get them repaired. Fairphone is a great option. 5 years guaranteed, swap out the battery or display, responsibly source conflict-free recycled materials. So you got your devices, but what is often driving the devices is the growth in data. So data has absolutely exploded. We're now in the era of the zettabyte. And I calculated how many trees you'd have to cut down to print out 1 zettabyte. So in 2010, we had 2 zettabytes. You'd need the wood from 20 trillion trees to print out 1 zettabyte of data. So there are only 3.5 trillion trees on the planet. So you can imagine how much data that is. So by 2015, 12, by 2047, then 175, 602, by 2035, over 2,000 zettabytes. These are almost unimaginable quantities of data. And you know what? 28% annual growth rate, absolutely extraordinary. And 90% of data is crap. 90% of data is not used 3 months after it's stored. So if we could be creating and storing and collecting much less data, we would need much less devices. But we have been taught, that there's no cost to this data. Collect as much, store as much as you want. So data reduction principles. Minimize design creation waste. So always go for less content, less code, less communication in the process. Store the least amount of data possible in most energy efficient manner possible. So look at your archival strategies. If there's data that you don't need, except for legal reasons, archive it. Archival is up to 150 times more energy reductive than is always on systems like the cloud. Collect least amount of data possible. Look at this stuff. What do you need to collect? All this stuff on customers. Most people don't need web analytics. That's the actual truth. For the vast majority of organizations, web analytics doesn't tell you anything really useful, right? Send least amount of data possible, right, in the process. So here, I'm just going to give you a quick flavor of this. I did a lot of work on the weight of content. So I did this calculations about 1,000 words of text. If you were writing 1,000 words of text, took 20 hours, you did it on a laptop, it ended up being a 5 megabyte file because you had some images in it as well. And it's just read once and the reading time is 4 minutes. Then to create that, because the 20 hours is happening on a laptop, is about 2 kg of CO2. Distributing and reading it and storing it is fractional. But about 2 kgs of CO2 for 1,000 words of text. So just saying to people, do we really need to write this? Do we really need to create? Do we really need to cause another 2 kg of CO2? Content has weight, content creates pollution. So here we're looking at basically the growth of digital photos over time. By 1900, first photos taken about 1826, 1827. By 1900, about 1 million photos taken. And you can see over the decades, not that massive of a growth. In the 80s, it begins to grow a bit, the decade 2000, and then you see 2010 and the decade from 2010 to 2020, absolutely exploding. 14 trillion photos taken. So 1.4 trillion photos were taken in 2020, more than in the entire 20th century. So we're taking now more photographs every year than we took in the entire 20th century. And the vast majority of them are useless. And you know what? The vast majority of them, they disrupt our ability to find the good ones in the process. So looking at emails, our communication environment, somebody did a study that said sending a physical letter takes about creates 29 grams of CO2. for the paper and the transport, etc. Where sending an email is about 4 grams of CO2, and a spam is 0.3 of a gram of actually CO2, because most spam gets caught early on and doesn't get sent around the network. But the attachments can be up to 50 grams. So emails with big attachments can cause up to 50 grams of actual CO2 in the process. It's not quite as simple as that as well. 29 grams for a physical letter. A HTML email is more intense than a text-based email. So here's a rule: send lightest. Send, if you can, if you use Outlook, default to text. It is 3 times less energy intense than sending a HTML email, and the vast majority of times you don't need that HTML layout in the process. Spam again, 0.3, 50 grams for attachment. But if you send a HTML email with 1 image, then it can go up to 8 grams. So as you add particularly images to the environment, so you see there's a scaling, the lighter, the better in the process. So, but people say, oh, but it's still better than sending physical letters. Well, 405 billion letters are posted every year, and there are 390 billion emails sent every day. And 80% of those, 84% of those are actually spam in the process. So what happens with technologies is that we get efficiency, but then we treble the use. So we double the efficiency, we treble the use, and we end up consuming more energy over time rather than less energy over time in the process. So I calculated the impact. They say that only 6% of emails with attachments, those 6% of those attachments are actually opened. So the vast majority of those attachments, nobody's even opened them. So I calculated between unopened attachments and unread emails and spam, we'd have to plant 32 billion trees every year to deal with the pollution from waste, from absolute crap and waste. So cut the crap. Let's get rid of the waste in the environment. So in relation to emails, calculate cost of sending and receiving, read less, unsubscribe, notifications, get rid of them, don't check so often, create less emails, less text, avoid HTML, don't use big signatures with images, attachments and links. If you want to reduce attachments, improve the intranet. Often the crappier the intranet, the more people send attachments because they know people won't be able to find the actual documents. Maintain more, allocate time to organize your emails and organize your information. The more you organize, the less crap you'll have and the less crap you'll send. Delete 90%, delete all emails more than 2 years old, archive, delete emails with large attachments earlier and file sizes immediately, delete old accounts. Here's some tips for online meetings. Kaylee was saying, about keeping the screen off. For basically a 2-person meeting for an hour by audio is about 27 megabytes using Skype or Zoom. But with video, it's 270 or 300. So if you go to audio, you're creating 90% pollution. So meet and greet for the first 5 minutes with video and then go to audio. And you know what? It's better for people's mental health in the vast majority of situations. Use the lowest resolution possible. Use the smallest screens possible. Avoid virtual backgrounds. Virtual backgrounds are quite energy intense, so avoid them if at all possible. Consider the platform. Zoom is 2 to 3 times more energy efficient than Teams in the way it's designed. Don't save the meeting unless you have to. Delete saved videos after 3 months of those meetings. And text and phone instead, in the process. Always go for the lightest option if at all possible. So what about the lightest option? I saved 1,000 words of text. And when I saved it as a text file, it was 6 kilobytes. And basically, weight equals pollution. That's the basic rule. Weight equals pollution, weight equals CO2. The lighter the weight, the less the pollution. So if I save that 1,000 words as optimized, so well-designed HTML, it's 7 KB. HTML is the most environmentally programming language that exists. You know, it's an extraordinarily simple, light language. Use it as much as possible. If I saved that as a Word document, it would be about 16 kilobytes. If I saved it as a poorly optimized HTML, it would be 51. If I saved it as PDF, it would be over 60. PDF has certain functions, but generally speaking, avoid PDFs. Not a good idea. So PDF can be 9 times more CO2 than optimized HTML. So 1,000 words of CO2 is about 2 A4 pages. So I got 2 images roughly the size of 2 A4 pages and got some calculations on those. So the basic taking up 2 A4 pages, about 178 kilobytes at 150 dpi. This is the most optimized format, WebP. At 150 dpi, 400, 300 dpi WebP, 392, 300 dpi JPEG, almost a megabyte. So you can see that the formats that you use in the images are very important, and properly optimizing your images can save huge quantities. But think about your images, because they are significantly more impactful on the environment than is text. Can be 212 times more CO2 than text. So then I went to audio. So to read 1,000 words is about 4 minutes. So 4 minutes at MP3 128 kbps is about 4 megabytes. MP3 256, 8 megabytes. WAV, never use WAV unless you're in a recording studio with a music group, 66 megabyte in the process. So WAV can be 11,000 times more CO2 than text. Let's go to video, 4 minutes of video, 24 frames per second, 55 megabytes. YouTube standard 70. YouTube high definition 110, 4K 932 megabyte, 8K video 2,400 megabyte, 2.4 gigabyte. You see the absolute impact as we go up the scales. So trying to choose the lightest option for the communication. I'm not saying never use images, I'm not saying never use video, but really think. And when you're doing video, use every second, treat it as an extraordinarily precious actual resource. An 8K video is 400,000 times more polluting than the equivalent amount of communication in text. So finally, reduce weight, always looking to make things lighter. Delete your details from the web, just a good general practice. Delete emails more than 2 years old. Delete all data more than 2 years old, or at least archive it. Delete unused accounts. Delete unused software and apps. Delete subscriptions. Delete files in your download folders and empty the trash and cut the crap. Thanks for listening.
Gerry, that was a lot. I'm just going to take a breath to absorb some of that. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us.
No problem, Kaylee. And you'll have the present. I'll send you on the presentation as well, so you can share it with people if I was going too fast. Apologies.
No, thank you so much. I mean, it was absolutely jam-packed with practical steps that we can all take, and all the comments are coming in for appreciation for you. So thank you for that. Yeah, wow. Okay. Well, next up, it's my pleasure to introduce Hannah Smith. Hannah is co-founder of Green Tech Southwest, which is a meetup open to all that explores the environmental impacts, both positive and negative, of technology. She's also founder of the Let's Green the Web campaign, run with the climate action tech community, that aims to raise awareness of the carbon emissions arising from websites. Her day job is as a freelance WordPress developer. So Hannah's going to give a brief intro and then lead a Q&A with Gerry. And you all had the chance to submit your questions when you signed up. So she's going to focus on those that haven't been answered by Gerry's fantastic presentation. If there are time for a couple of live questions at the end, then we will try and get to those. So pop them in the chat. But for now, over to you, Hannah. And Gerry, you might want to turn your screen share off and we can see you and no Hannah. But thank you.
Okay, good.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. Thank you, Gerry. I've heard you speak a few times before. In fact, you came along to Green Tech Southwest some time ago, and never fails to impress me just how informative your presentations are, and thought-provoking as well. Even though I would say I'm a bit of an expert in this topic myself, you always deliver something new to have a little think about. So thank you so much. So Kaylee did a great intro of me and actually explained what Green Tech Southwest is really well as well. So I don't think I'll do any further intro. I think, Gerry, if you've had chance to recover after your talk, we'll jump into some questions if that's okay.
Absolutely, Hannah. No, fire ahead.
All right, fantastic. Well, we had loads of questions come in from everyone, and with Kaylee's help, we've sifted through them into some broad topics. And actually, you answered quite a lot of the questions that came through in your talk, which we kind of knew you would do. But let's dip into a couple of other interesting areas. And what I've tried to do is, given that the talk's topic is about minimising your organisational digital footprint, I've tried to pick out the questions that are most relevant to that rather than to individuals. So, and the other thing is, I really like to encourage the audience to get involved with crowdsourcing some answers and ideas as you and I are talking. I actually know quite a lot of people here, and I know that there are some other very knowledgeable people here in the room as well, in the virtual room. So if you're there and you're listening and you have resources you could share or thoughts or ideas on these topics yourselves, I really strongly encourage you all to pile into the chat, and let's make this as rich an experience as we possibly can. Okay, so Gerry, in your talk, you talked a lot about the problems that we're facing, and a lot of the work that you do is around helping people realise that we've got an issue and making what's invisible visible to people. But it's hard to get a grip on what's going on, especially if you're not a techie. So I guess the first question, or the first sort of area I'd like to go into with you is, what have you come across that you think helps people measure their digital footprints? And what do you know of that helps people get a tangible grip on what they're doing?
Yeah, I think, yeah, you've kind of summarized a lot, the core, the invisibility aspect of it. And then it struck me one day that actually it's not really invisible. I'm looking at it. You know, I'm looking at my laptop. I'm looking at my smartphone. That if you actually don't think of digital as the cloud, but think of it as your machine, then, you know, you see, well, there's a physical thing there, right? So, and then that then I did research on the smartphones, and I discovered that there's about 1,000 different materials in a smartphone. So you've got this device that is extraordinarily intense. And I think the more you think about the device, the more it becomes real. You know, and the more you try and think about data, the more harder it is to conceptualize it, but the more you actually keep thinking about the device, the coltan and the 16, 17 rare earth lithium, you know, how it takes 500,000 gallons of water in Chile to get 1 ton of lithium to go into our batteries, you know, and the impacts, and that the local farmers in Chile no longer have water because we have batteries. You know, I think the more we bring it back to the physical of what makes digital, the more I have found that grounds me in that, you know, these are physical things, these are physical materials. You have an extraordinarily precious device that has had a huge impact on the climate. Like, I don't think there's any other material development that creates as much waste in its manufacture per gram. You know, to get 150 grams of a smartphone, there's about 75 grams of those as material. So to get those 75 grams of rare earths, etc., you have to dig out 90 kgs of stones and slag. And you know, I don't think there's any other, making a car or making any, that has that proportional impact on. So the more you think physically, I have found, about the device you have, and you think, wow, this is such an incredibly precious thing that had a lot of impact on the climate, and I really have to look after this thing, and I really need to look after this battery, because there's farmers in Chile who can't grow their crop because I've got my lithium in my battery in the process. And I think the more we really think about the physicality of digital, the more we can really begin to understand its impacts.
I think that's a really interesting point there. And there is a lot of increasing news around how, as you rightly pointed out there, Gerry, the mining for things is taking away basic human rights for people in other countries. We're perhaps not seeing that enough.
Well, we don't.
And
you know, Hannah, that's mining always did that.
Yeah.
Mining always has been a really dirty industry, and it hasn't changed.
No, it's true. That's true. I'm from Wales, from near the valleys, so
right.
Yes,
yeah,
I've got a lot of history around mining from where I hail from. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So coming back to helping, so we've talked brilliant point there about appreciating the value of these physical technologies that we're holding in our hands. Are there any resources that you're aware of that draw together some of the facts and figures that you've given us? I mean, obviously there's your book. I thought I'd wave it to oh, I'm on blur. You can't see it. I have a copy of your book here, which is a mine of useful information. Are you aware of any other tools that collate this?
Well, you know, as you know yourself, the website Carbon Calculator is a wonderful one from a website point of view. And Tom Greenwood and Benita Greenwood, Whole Grain Digital, have done amazing work, a wonderful book, Sustainable Web Design. Tim Frick in Mighty Bytes. There's a lot if we go out looking for sustainable what they call web design principles. There's a lot of but it's more techy. The climate action group on Slack, you know, if you're slightly more techy, there's loads of really good feedback and comments there. I think there's a lot of tools emerging, and I think, you know, thinking about, you know, that your content has weight. Like what I'll give as well after this is I'll give the background calculations of how I got 2 kg for doing it. I've created this little calculator. It's not fantastic, but it's very rough and ready. But it'll give a sense of, actually, you know, I did these calculations, and I said that using a smartphone for an hour is about I calculated across its total life, so an allocation to its manufacture and its use, etc. So using it for an hour is about 16 grams of CO2. So using a laptop is about 100 grams of CO2, and using a desktop, because they're much more energy intense, can be over 200. So you can get a sense of, if you're doing something for 50 hours, you can have a rough idea of the CO2 impact that has in the process. And I'll certainly give those calculations as well, if anyone is interested.
Fantastic, thank you, Gerry. And when we finish the Q&A, I'll drop some of the links that you mentioned into the chat as well, because there are a lot of resources out there, but at the moment you have to work quite hard, I think, to access them and make use of them. At the moment, I think, coming back to your point, I think I saw a tweet from you earlier about use your own energy. I think at the moment,
yes. Because, you know, we emit about 1 kg of CO2 every day, an average human. You know, so, you know, we need to be using, you know, and that's because we're burning energy and we're breathing and etc. And if we don't use that energy, it doesn't do us any good. So, like, use our energy. I think it's less technology combined with human energy is the way out of the climate crisis.
Fantastic. Thank you, Gerry. And I can see a few of you are sharing some links and some suggestions in the chat as well. Okay, so I'm going to move on from measurement, and let's talk a little bit about digital storage. So Gerry, something you said in your talk was you really are encouraging people to cut the crap. I think that's one of your Gerry phrase, that cut the crap. And you were sort of imploring people to get rid of stuff they don't need for, obviously keep stuff you need for legal reasons, but anything that's really just not needed, get rid of it. So of course, we recognize that there is a certain amount of digital data that a business needs to keep. And I think a lot of people were asking questions around, well, what is the least impactful way that we can store said data? Yeah. And I think you did touch on it on your talk, but I think it's useful to bring this out because I think a lot of people want to know about it. So the question, I'll just phrase the question so everyone's clear who's listening. How can companies be more responsible cloud users, and should they consider moving to on-premise storage?
Yeah, not necessarily on-premise because it can be more inefficient, but really archival. Archival systems are much less energy intense because they kind of, it's not always on. So really good, an archival system can be up to 150 times less intense than an always on type of system. So an archive is essentially, it's hassle. You have to dig and select, and then it has to collect and download because it's waking up some sort of a system. So the archive is an extremely important part of any strategy in the process. So it's not necessarily about on-premises. However, for a small business, if you mean by on-premises a USB stick or a hard drive, a hard drive is actually 3,000 times less intense than the cloud. So if you're just something like that you're showing, for stuff that you're thinking, hey, I should just keep this, but just in case, stick it on a hard drive. The less distance data has to travel, everything else being equal, the less energy. So the closer it is on your computer or on your hard drive, that's the way. Small business, the stuff, I only keep 3, 4, 5% of my data in the cloud, and that's the active stuff that I'm working with clients on. And then the other stuff that I think, maybe I keep it in an archive, and then the stuff that I think is not going to be used, I keep it on hard disks. And if that, because I know even if the hard disk goes bad, probably I'd never use it anymore. And I don't think in 10 years I've gone back maybe once or twice to those hard disks so getting into that culture of moving it to less energy intense, and then it becomes easier to delete it, to let it go, because the vast majority of old content, it gets in the way of your ability to find the stuff that you need to do your day-to-day job. So that small business hard disk is by far the most environmentally friendly way of storing data.
Fantastic. Thank you for the clarity on that, Gerry. So just in case anybody isn't sure what we're talking about, this is a little hard drive that I keep on my desk. And Gerry, what you're talking about is actually this, you're saying is a more environmentally friendly way than sending your data up to the cloud. So as much as possible, we want to be using hard drives, but we want to be using them efficiently because we still have an environmental impact of creating these things in the first place. Brilliant. Well, thank you for the clarity on that. So on-premises is not necessarily better. It's about disk drives that turn off. That's what we're talking about.
And in the cloud, they kind of better cooling or better and better usage. So on-premises is complicated, but what you're showing there on-premises for a small business, perfect.
Brilliant. Thank you, Gerry. I'm just going to blur my background again. Right. Thank you, Gerry. So I'm going to move on to the next topic. We had a lot of questions around influencing others. Now, if we're going to tackle these issues, we would like everybody who's here today to take these messages from Gerry back into their teams, back into their organisations, and start discussions about how things can be done differently. What is the crap that can be gotten rid of? But we know that persuading other people is quite hard. You know, there's been messages around climate change for a long time, and people still are slow to act and slow to change their ways. So Gerry, I thought it might be useful to the audience if we just talked a little bit, because I know you've had a lot of experience working with very large organisations and right at the C-suite level. I thought it'd be useful for us to talk about what practical tips you have for influencing others and taking these messages. So I guess I'll just ask you the question generally, first of all, what are your top tips for taking these messages into organisations?
Yeah, I think, Hannah, you know, actual limits help, you know, and you know, remember the days when we had a limit to our size for our email, you know, and people lived with those limits. So I think setting limits, because of course the cloud people, they want us to pretend that it's a limitless world, but it's not a limitless world, because that's how they make money, by making us produce more and more data. So actually setting limits in the process of, you know, mandating things like, so what you could do in a process, say, well, every 2 years we delete our email. So what we're going to do is we're going to move the email from 2019 to the archive. You know, so we got a system, because people are always, that's archiving is a kind of a path to deletion, because people are scared that there will be some reason for the stuff. So often you can have a strategy that it goes to the archive for 3 years, and then if it's no longer, then it gets deleted, fully deleted after 5 years. So it's a path to actual deletion, which gives people a little bit of comfort that, oh, I'm not going to lose this thing that I'm never going to go back to anyway in the process. So setting limits. One thing that I found as well that worked was creating analogies. So I sometimes use the analogy of using trees. So a tree is about 10 kg of CO2. It can sequester about 10 kg of CO2 a year. An average tree. Trees are very different. But then, so I came up with a model where, let's say, this average tree has 10,000 leaves. So, you know, so that's 1 gram of CO2 per leaf. So if you're sending an email, you see 4 grams, you see 4 leaves die in the process. So kind of connecting it to the physical world and saying, you know, here, like, so we have these models. So this report, there's about 2 kg of CO2. So if we do 5 of these reports, 1 tree needs to work for a year to deal with that. Do we really need to do that? So I kind of bringing examples and models and saying, well, our coding, so if we're developing a feature here, that's about 10 kg. So you do some work on how many hours of programmers or whatever you're doing, you know, you start measuring, coming up with metrics of the type of activities. So if we send a marketing campaign and that's going to go out to 10,000 people, it's going to be open, you can do rough calculations of how many kgs of CO2 is that causing. So really bringing back into your world some sort of a linkage to the actual pollution that the activities actually occur. I think people can begin to see, hey, there's a connection here. Writing this report is not free for the planet. It does have impacts, but putting certain numbers on those and putting certain limits, like the number of emails. Why don't we try and send no more than 20 emails a day, you know, in the process? And then you might have competitions for the lightest mailbox or stuff like that in the process. But really encouraging people, you know, to connect with the impacts of what they're doing. And then sometimes you do need to set limits because people just won't do it otherwise.
Interesting advice. Thank you, Gerry. That's brilliant. Okay, I'm conscious, I'm just looking at time. So I know Kaylee wanted us to sort of finish probably just in a couple of minutes. So I'm going to rattle through a quick, I'm hoping quick fire answers, but I know with this stuff, it's never easy, is it? Because the answer.
Well, I'll try to be as fast as I can.
So one of the questions that I wanted to ask you on with regards to influencing others was, what can individuals and teams do when they can't make changes at an organizational level? So if they don't have decision-making power, what's your advice to them?
Well, I think, Hannah, you know, my advice is get involved with outside groups, get involved in right to repair. I think most of the change will not occur organisationally, it'll occur societally. It'll be societal groups driving political decisions which will result in organisational change. I think it's really challenging for organisations to change, because organisations are trapped in the model of short-term revenue, quarterly returns, etc. So I think it's very difficult to get organisational change, but it is much more likely to get societal change. So join a group, I would say, of like-minded people, either get involved in right to repair or whatever, because where I see the real impacts occurring now are in small dedicated groups of peer-based, socially oriented groups, rather than through, I mean, Apple doesn't want to change. Apple has been dragged kicking and screaming to, you know, allow repair. Most, Microsoft a little bit better, but none of them initiated repair initiatives until they were forced to by social movements. So get involved socially. You're probably going to have a much bigger impact than within your organization.
Oh, I think that's great advice. Really, really great. And last question. I had a few more lined up, but time always marches on, doesn't it? I thought one other question that we saw came up a few times, and I think might be very relevant to people thinking about digital organizational footprints. In your opinion, Gerry, is there a difference between working from home or going into the office when it comes to digital footprints?
Well, it depends, Hannah, you know, because, you know, there was a study, I think, done in the UK 12 months ago, which found that people were driving just as much working from home as when they were just driving differently. So if we don't, if we still consume as much energy or more, and then at home you've got your heating bills, which I'm sure individualized, etc., over, you know, the energy, good energy design in appropriate offices. So not necessarily, you know, in the process, it can be better, but there has to be less. You know, if you're getting into your car instead of getting on your bicycle or walking down to your store to buy your shopping or stuff like that, you know, in many cases you may end up consuming more energy and creating more pollution than when you were driving into the office. So we really need to be careful that we don't just assume these things result in more positive impacts. We have to reduce energy consumption. Big problem is not renewable energy. The big problem is not how do we produce more energy. The big challenge is how do we consume less energy. Brilliant.
Thanks, Gerry. And actually, Kaylee's just messaged and said we have time for one more question.
Okay.
So I'm going to sneak another one in because it's fantastic to be able to chat to you about this and ask the questions from the audience. So now this is the last one, promise, very last one, because I know you've been working hard there, Gerry. I've been grilling you and you've been sharing a lot of amazing information with us. And I wanted to ask you a question around team culture, the very last one. In your experience, how do you balance the benefits of online let me try that again. Sorry, I fell over my words there. Yeah. How do you balance the benefits of online collaboration without feeling negative because of the digital carbon footprint? So how do you deal with that sort of shame and guilt that often happen?
But everything we do consumes some energy. So if we can get from collaboration a better bicycle or a better something, you know, that results in a more positive impact in a reduction in energy. So if the collaboration creates 2 kg of CO2, but we save 12, well, it's good, you know, and sometimes you can't really calculate it, but it will be through, you know, collaboration. We won't solve these problems on our own. You know, they're far too complicated to design anything, to create anything. But a lot of the actual solutions will be more social. rather than technological in the process. So probably we need to be pushing that once the pandemic is over, that we get back into physical collaborative spaces more, you know, as we get out of the actual pandemic. But collaboration and social, and maybe one thing, it's not quite exactly linked, but one of my big discoveries looking at this as well is that you cannot address climate change without addressing social justice, because it is in the global south that lithium is mined. It is in you know, the Congo that coltan is mined. More people have been killed over coltan than in any event since the Second World War. Coltan is an essential material in computers. So it is the exploitation. Those who exploit the earth also exploit other people. There's a direct link, and it is the exploitation of the earth and its resources that has got us to this negative place. And I think, you know, the broader, you know, stepping back, and you know, another discovery I found was that multidisciplinary, multicultural collaboration delivers the best results. I was at a conference here last week where they were talking about entrepreneurs, Maori entrepreneurs in New Zealand, and they said a Maori entrepreneur looks 200 years into the future. And we need to bring that sort of collaboration into our space, that we're hearing these stories from very different places, and particularly from more indigenous or traditional, not that they've all the answers, but I think we need to reach back and look forward. So collaboration, absolutely essential. The more physical we can make it as the pandemic ends, but good collaboration will have a net benefit effect, I've no doubt.
Excellent. Thank you, Gerry. Thank you so much. We'll bring Kate. Oh, there Kaylee's popped back like if by magic. So Kaylee, I think we're done with questions. So I'll hand back to you.
Thank you so much, Hannah and Gerry, and everyone who submitted a question. Yeah, really, really interesting. And it's great to hear about how important collaboration is, as we know that at the partnership. Okay, so the next section is a short one. We're going to hear from 3 organisations who have got some useful insights to share from their experience. It's going to be really quick fire. So I will introduce you and then just unmute and switch your camera on for your short talk. I'll keep an eye on the time and I'll let you finish before introducing the next person. Hopefully it's a fun and quick fire way to share some real life examples. And if anyone else has got any examples of what your organisation has done that might be helpful for others, do share them in the chat. So first up, I'd like to introduce Rachel Mills from Buttercup Learning, who I believe is here as David Mills. So welcome to Rachel.
Yeah, hi everybody. Apologies for coming through on my husband's Zoom link. I'm actually hosting a session with animation students on my own Zoom profile as well at the same time. So Ardma are on one call and you guys were on this one. So I am an animation lecturer and also founder of Buttercup Learning. Buttercup Learning is my baby around eco-educational content for children. So we create augmented reality posters, and we're also creating at the moment a sustainably designed e-learning platform, and very much come from a content producer background. So as some of you here probably are aware, that can be quite a challenge when it comes to thinking about how you design a website that is content rich, but at the same time is sustainable. Last year when I was setting up Buttercup, I must admit I didn't really come at this with that mindset. And it was Hannah who actually kind of sort of shook up my thinking a little bit about it and inspired me to take another real hard look at my company site and see if I could put some sustainable web design into practice. I'm not a web developer, but I've managed to take my old site, which was 65% dirtier than the average website, to something that's now between sort of 65, 72% much better than the average site. So initially I used the carbon calculator and started to make some really strategic decisions about what we put on our site, how we put our images together, how we use our file sharing system with a very small team, and really kind of cleaned up our act. It took about a month to get that to a point where I was really happy. And it's something that we're continuing to kind of work on. And for me, you know, to be a company that's trying to get children engaged with nature and to think about the impact that we have on the environment, and to not have the website that was matching just doesn't make any sense. So we're part of Better Business Act, and we're really involved in also training the next generation of creatives. So in my job as an animation lecturer, I'm working on a project with students to think about their environmental impact, so their digital impact of their portfolio websites. And we're also looking at the power usage of different students by process, so we can start to put in some really good practice with them. And we've had a really, really fantastic uptake from students about that. So the future is sustainable design. And if a non-web developer can do it, so can you guys.
Thank you very much, Rachel. That's really great to hear. Okay, next up we have got Ruth Smith from Sustainable Results Lab. Ruth, if you want to unmute yourself, welcome.
Hang on. Hello, so I'm Ruth from Sustainable Results Lab. So we are a marketing and communications agency working with sustainable businesses in sort of green tech, sustainable construction sector. We're going to talk about digital declutters, which is something that we try and do before every website redesign project or any marketing campaign or strategy project that we do. And the fantastic thing for me about doing a digital declutter is it helps you get to know your audience better, helps you improve your audience experience, and helps you get better results for the environment and for your business. So I just thought I'd quickly talk you through key things that we would be doing in a digital declutter. So the first is a deep dive into your analytics. So we're looking there at most popular content, least popular content, and if you're seeing content, for example, that no one is reading or looking at, then you can, as Gerry was saying, you can archive it, or better still, just delete it. And that's a process that, as well as big projects, you should get into the habit of doing sort of once a quarter. One thing I found really, really insightful is to be looking at referral traffic. We did that once for a client, and we found that a huge proportion of traffic was actually coming from toxic backlinks with origins in Russia and China. And so we realised from that there was a security problem with the site. So we were able to sort that out and immediately had valuable content for their target audience. The other thing we do is just trying to look at things like bounce rates, for example, and really understand user journeys and how people are moving through your site, and are they getting what they need and of what sort of value. So, and the idea here is that every click counts. So if you can simplify your user journey and say, for example, keep people on one page to get them what they need to know and add value to their knowledge and help them, that is a much, much more environmentally friendly way of operating, but it's also a better user experience and more likely to help you achieve your goals. And there's so much you can do around streamlining your content. And then one thing we do there, as well as once the analytics help you do that as you're doing a digital declutter, but then use insights from behavioural sciences and neuroscience to make that content much more valuable and rich. So what you're looking for, as Gerry was saying, is like less content, but of higher value that's achieving your goals. Yeah, it's that 2 minutes. The other thing, yeah, is just also use Google Page Insights, which is a really useful tool. For example, will tell you really quickly which of your images are too big, and you can reduce them straight away. So loads you can do.
Thank you so much, Ruth. That's brilliant. Okay, and finally, before we move to wrapping up and the networking, we have got Stephanie Husty from Ecosurety with a slightly different project that she's talking about. Welcome.
Hi everyone, so I'm Steph from Ecosurety. We are a B Corp certified business, and we help UK companies to reduce the environmental impact of their products. including waste electricals. And we've run a campaign in November with Bristol Waste and Wrapup. It was an awareness campaign around e-waste to help Bristol residents to realize the impact of e-waste and give them some clues about how to reduce their impact. And basically, it was a lot of information around if you can prevent recycle in the first place, it's better. So people don't always realize, as Gerry has pointed out before, that it's better to reuse, it's better to repair before recycle something if it's still valuable, because it's better to keep it in the process in the economy as long as possible. So as part of the campaign, so it was really focused on consumers and Bristol residents, but lots of information we've provided to residents are really valid to businesses as well. So yeah, it's not only about recycling. Recycling should be the last resort. We should think first about repairing, then reuse, donate or gift to someone or another business or a school or like a charity project if you're a business, for example, before actually recycling your equipment. So our campaign was not only about electronic equipment, it could be like your kettle, anything with a plug, but it's something to remember as well, because today we've talked about hardware, like electronic equipment, but yeah, anything with a plug, we should think about that first. So yeah, I guess I encourage every one of you as an employee in your company to think twice, and hoarding. So also, hoarding is a killer. Like if you don't use an electric or electronic equipment, think about selling it, donate it, instead of it gathering dust and not being efficient in the long run, or not being able to use it in the long run. So there are like some tips we can all use as both consumers and employees of businesses.
Fantastic, thank you very much, Stephanie, and to all our guest organisations for sharing your experience, knowledge and learnings, and thank you of course to Gerry and Hannah for your insights, and to my colleague Claire for handling all the behind the scenes tech, and to you all for coming along. I really hope you found it useful and motivating. Do stay on for the networking. It's a great chance to connect with others and embed some of the learning from this event. And also we are going to post a feedback form link in the chat. We're really keen to get your views and ideas. We want to make the climate action programme as impactful as possible, and our resources and activities to be shaped by the challenges that you and your organisations are facing. So please share what you found useful today, what your main takeaways are, and anything you'd like to see covered in the future. And keep an eye on our website and mailing for further events and resources. We have more climate action breakfasts coming up, and we're in the breakfast or lunch, and we're in the process of organising the next Intention to Action clinic focused on energy, and this will be an interactive and solutions focused event. So we've now got 15-20 minutes for some semi-structured networking. What we'll do is open small breakout groups for some smaller discussions, and this part of the session won't be recorded, so feel free to turn your cameras on, and please start by introducing yourself, and we've got some suggested prompts for your conversation as well, which we'll also put in the chat, and they are: what learning or action are you taking back to your organisation from today? And what will you start, continue and stop in relation to your digital activities? So over to Claire for the breakout groups, and it's just to say again, thank you so much for coming, and I hope you have a lovely afternoon and see you again soon.